Detective Inspector Alara Voss sat in the corner of the village library. The single candle on the oak table, her only companion against the encroaching shadows. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faded pages of the widow's ledger spread before her. The fog outside thickened, its tendrils pressing against the ancient window panes, as if trying to seep into the room itself. The ledger was no longer just a record of inheritances. It was a map of secrets, a key to the village's unnatural existence. For hours, Alara had traced the cryptic symbols interspersed with the neat, looping handwriting of centuries past. Each entry hinted at transactions far beyond mere property, disappearances, warnings, and, most disturbingly, references to a pact. A pact she now realized was no mere legend whispered in Eldermore's taverns, but a binding contract that ensnared the villagers in a web of immortality and silence. She leaned back, the wood creaking beneath her, and allowed herself a moment to absorb the weight of her discovery. The ledger was not just a ledger. It was a ledger of life itself, a ledger that held the power to grant eternal youth, but at an unimaginable price. A sudden knock at the heavy wooden door startled her. She closed the ledger carefully and rose, her trench coat whispering in the stillness. Opening the door, she found Margaret Langley standing in the doorway, her presence as commanding and serene as ever. The pale skin of Margaret's face contrasted sharply with the deep black of her vintage attire, silver strands of hair framing her ageless visage. "Detective Voss," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying both warning and a strange sadness. "The ledger is not what you think it is. There are forces at play here that you cannot begin to understand." Alara met her gaze steadily. "I understand more than you think, Margaret. The ledger is a binding contract. It grants immortality, but at a cost, and the villagers are trapped by it." Margaret's eyes flickered with a mixture of pride and despair. Yes, the original pact was made to protect the village from decay and ruin, but it demands silence, secrecy, and sacrifice. To break it would be to unravel the very fabric of Before Alara could respond, footsteps echoed softly behind Margaret. Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock stepped into the light, their expressions tense, eyes flickering between the two women. "We've been debating," Thomas said quietly, adjusting his spectacles nervously, "whether to stand with you or with Margaret. The past weighs heavy on us all." Sophie nodded, her auburn curls catching the candlelight. "The truth is dangerous, but so is living a lie." Alara felt the fragile alliance shift beneath her feet. The village's future hung in a precarious balance. She returned to the ledger, her fingers tracing the edges of a hidden compartment she had just discovered. Inside lay a faded letter, its ink blurred by time but still legible. The letter detailed the terms of the original pact: immortality granted in exchange for eternal silence and the surrender of personal freedom. Any who defied the pact would face consequences far worse than death. A cold draft swept through the room as distant thunder rumbled, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within. "This is the truth," Alara said, her voice steady but heavy. "The ledger isn't just a record, it's a prison." Margaret sighed, stepping closer. "And yet, it is the only thing holding us together. Without it, Eldermore would fall apart. The weight of centuries pressed down on them all." Alara knew that the coming confrontation would decide not just the fate of the village, but the very meaning of justice, mortality, and sacrifice. Her mind raced, piecing together every fragment of the puzzle. The ledger's power was absolute, binding the villagers to an eternal existence that came at the cost of their freedom, their honesty, and, perhaps, their souls. Tomorrow, Alara said quietly, we decide. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the village in its cold embrace, as if to hold its secrets just a little longer. The edge of revelation had been reached, and the true reckoning was about to begin. The night had settled deep over Eldermoor, the fog curling in tendrils around the ancient stone buildings, muffling the usual sounds of the village. Detective Inspector Alara Voss stood outside the weathered door of the village library, her breath visible in the cold air. The faint sound of rain tapping against the leaded glass windows accompanied the low murmur of voices within. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, the scent of old parchment and wood smoke enveloping her. Thomas Graves looked up from a worn leather-bound tome, his round spectacles catching the flicker of the oil lamp beside him. His face, usually reserved and cautious, now bore the weight of conflicted emotions. Ilara, he said quietly, there are things you need to understand about this village, about what we've all been forced to endure. She gestured to the chair opposite him, settling in with a steady gaze. Start from the beginning, Thomas. Tell me everything. He hesitated, fingers tracing a faded map of Eldermoor's oldest estates. The pact, he began, voice low, is more than just a legend. It's the reason our people don't age. But it came at a cost, a price in blood and silence. I've spent years guarding that secret, torn between loyalty to my ancestors and the truth you seek. Alara nodded slowly, her mind piecing together the fragments of whispered stories and ledger entries. And the ledger? It's a ledger of sins, Thomas replied, covering up murders, disappearances, and betrayals. I was part of the effort to keep it hidden, to protect the village from itself. But I see now that hiding the truth only breeds more darkness. Before she could respond, the library door creaked open again, and Sophie Whitlock slipped inside, her auburn curls damp from the mist outside. Her bright eyes darted nervously between Ilara and Thomas. We need to talk, Sophie said hurriedly, pulling Alara aside once Thomas had left. There's something you don't know. I've been meeting with Margaret. Alara's brow furrowed. Margaret Langley, the one warning me to stop. Sophie nodded, biting her lip. She's more involved than anyone realizes. She's been manipulating the village, keeping people loyal to the pact. I thought I could help you, but I'm afraid I've been part of her plan. The betrayal stabbed sharper than the cold mist outside. Why, Sophie? Why would you do this? Because I wanted to protect my family, Sophie whispered, tears glistening. And because I'm terrified of what revealing the truth would mean for all of us. Ilara placed a steady hand on Sophie's shoulder, the weight of trust and treachery settling heavily between them. We need to be careful. The truth is dangerous, but so is silence. Later, in the dimly lit back room of the inn, Ilara faced Margaret Langley. The elder woman's serene yet commanding presence filled the space, her pale skin almost glowing in the flickering candlelight. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned back meticulously, her vintage black attire immaculate. You've come far, detective, Margaret said softly, voice like velvet with steel beneath. But some stones are better left unturned. The pact has kept this village alive, preserved its harmony. Exposing it would unravel everything, not just for Eldermoor, but for you as well. Alara's eyes burned with determination. Keeping people imprisoned in lies is no harmony. There's a cost to this immortality, and it's time the village paid it honestly. Margaret's gaze hardened. And what if that cost is too high? What if the truth destroys us all? Their voices lowered to fierce whispers, the tension crackling like a storm about to break. As the confrontation simmered, Father Benedict observed quietly from the shadows of the church, his expression grave. The village's fractures were deepening, and with each betrayal, the moral weight of the secret pressed heavier on the community. He understood the pain of silence, the burden of unspoken sins. Alara left the inn that night with more questions than answers. The betrayals among those she had hoped to trust, unraveling the fragile threads she was weaving toward the truth. The fog outside seemed thicker, oppressive, as if the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable reckoning. In the days that followed, alliances shifted unpredictably. Villagers whispered behind closed doors, eyes filled with suspicion and fear. Ilara's investigation had pierced the veil of secrecy, but at what cost? The web of lies and loyalties grew more tangled, and the shadow of danger loomed ever closer. As the chapter closed, Ilara stood once more at the edge of the village, the ledger's secrets heavy in her pack. She knew the next steps would be perilous. The question lingered in the cold air. Who among Eldamore's ageless inhabitants could she truly trust when betrayal hid behind every familiar face? The ledger's pages held more than just records. They held the fate of a village trapped in time. And Ilara was determined to see that fate unveiled, no matter the price. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss stepped cautiously into the dimly lit parlor of Evelyn Harper's cottage, the widow's ledger resting heavily on the worn oak table between her and Margaret Langley. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and fading wood smoke, a lingering testament to the house's long history. Outside, the fog clung like a shroud, muffling the distant calls of night creatures and isolating the room in a cocoon of silence and shadow. Margaret rose gracefully from her chair, her presence commanding despite the years that should have marked her. Pale skin and silver-streaked dark hair framed a face that bore the serene composure of someone who had seen centuries pass and bore their heavy weight. Her eyes, however, glimmered with a fierce protectiveness, a mother guarding a fragile legacy. Detective Margaret began, her voice calm yet unwavering. "You have come far, unraveling threads that were meant never to be pulled. But you must understand the ledger you hold is not merely a record of inheritances. It is the chronicle of our survival, our curse, and our duty." Ilara met her gaze steadily, the familiar fire of determination burning behind her dark eyes. "Survival at what price, Margaret? How many lives, how many betrayals have been sacrificed to keep this secret alive?" Margaret's lips quivered, betraying a momentary crack in her stoic facade. She reached into a nearby drawer, producing a faded, sepia-toned photograph. The edges were worn, the faces of the figures, men and women in austere Victorian attire, with an eerie permanence. "These were the founders of the pact," Margaret said softly, tracing a finger along the image. "They bound themselves and their descendants to a promise immortality in exchange for silence and sacrifice. Each generation has carried this burden, guarding Eldamore against the ravages of time and the outside world." Ilara's fingers tightened around the ledger, the weight of history pressing down on her. But what of the disappearances? The lies, the fear that stifles this village? Is that the price you speak of? Margaret's eyes darkened. "Every secret carries a price, detective. We have lost family, friends, and ourselves to preserve this fragile peace. If the secret is exposed, the village will crumble, and with it, the only home we have ever known." A sharp rap at the door announced the presence of Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock, who had lingered in the shadows, their expressions taut with tension. Thomas adjusted his round spectacles, his wiry frame tense. "Margaret, Ilara," he began cautiously, "this revelation cannot be ignored. The ledger's truth is a double-edged sword. To protect Eldamore, we must choose carefully what to reveal. Sophie stepped forward, her auburn curls framing a face flushed with resolve. I want to believe there's a way out of this, a path that doesn't end in silence or destruction. But the longer we hide, the more the village suffers. Margaret's gaze flicked between them, the weight of centuries bearing down. You do not understand the forces you challenge. Immortality is not a gift. It is a chain. One broken link could unleash chaos. Ilara's voice cut through the heavy air, resolute and clear. And yet, silence is complicity. I cannot stand by while lives are sacrificed to preserve a lie. The truth must be faced, no matter the cost. The room seemed to hold its breath as the four stood bound by the ledger's legacy, each grappling with the consequences of revelation and concealment. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows like the weight of unspoken secrets. Margaret's serene facade cracked at last, a tear glistening on her pale cheek. Then you leave me no choice. If the truth is to be told, it must come from me. But beware, detective, some truths are darker than the night that envelops Eldamore. Ilara nodded, steeling herself for the storm to come. I am ready. As Margaret began to unravel the pack's darkest chapters, Ilara listened. The ledger's pages fluttering in the draft, a fragile bridge between past and future, truth and consequence. The fragile balance of Eldamore hung by a thread, and the reckoning had only just begun. The confrontation in Evelyn Harper's parlor became a crucible, forging new alliances and fracturing old ones. As dawn threatened to break through the lingering fog, Ilara realized that the price of truth was not only the village's future, but her own, forever entwined with the widow's ledger and the shadows of The room was cloaked in shadows, the only illumination coming from the flickering candlelight that cast erratic shapes upon the walls of the hidden chamber. Beneath Evelyn Harper's cottage, Detective Inspector Lara Voss carefully opened the ancient ledger, its leather cover cracked and worn from centuries of handling. The scent of aged parchment filled the air, mingling with the faint musk of dust and forgotten secrets. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the faded ink of the final entries. The cryptic script unraveling a story far older and darker than she had ever imagined. Each page bore witness to generations bound by a pact, an unholy agreement forged in desperation, promising immortality to those who dared to embrace it. But the ledger did not speak only of life preserved. It whispered of sacrifices demanded, of blood spilled in shadows, and of sins inherited like a cursed legacy. Ilara's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the village's eerie timelessness and the price paid to sustain it. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like an unseen sentinel, muffling the world beyond. The silence was broken only by the soft rustle of pages and Ilara's measured breaths. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Margaret Langley stepped inside, her presence commanding yet serene. Her pale skin glowed faintly in the candlelight, silver-streaked hair framing a face etched with centuries of burden. "You've come far, Inspector," Margaret said softly, her voice a blend of warning and weary acceptance. "But some truths are heavier than the fog that blankets Eldamore." Ilara rose, meeting Margaret's gaze with unwavering resolve. The village deserves to know. The cost of this immortality, the ledgerate, cannot remain hidden any longer. Margaret's eyes darkened with sorrow. "Do you understand what you ask? To reveal the ledger is to unravel the delicate balance that holds this place together. The pact is not merely ink on parchment. It is a bond forged in blood and sacrifice. Exposing it could tear Eldamore apart." From the shadows, Thomas Graves emerged, adjusting his round spectacles nervously. "The history we preserve is fragile," he said, his voice wavering. "But truth must find its place, even if it fractures what we hold dear." Sophie Whitlock stepped forward, her auburn curls catching the candlelight. "I want to believe in a future where we aren't prisoners of this secret," she said quietly. "But what if the price of freedom is too high?" The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their choices settling like the fog outside. Alara closed the ledger gently and faced her companions. "We stand at a crossroads. To protect the secret is to deny justice and perpetuate a lie. To expose it is to risk everything: the village, its people, and perhaps even myself." As the night deepened, the four of them debated, each argument laced with fear, hope, and the aching knowledge that no path was without sacrifice. Ilara's thoughts drifted to her sister, lost to a crime left unsolved, and to the faces of those she'd met in Eldamore, so young, so unchanged, yet haunted by centuries. Morning light filtered weakly through the fog as Alara found herself alone on a hill overlooking the village. The ledger was clasped tightly in her hands, a tangible reminder of the burden she now bore. The mist swirled around her, as if the village itself held its breath, waiting. She whispered to the wind, "What is the right path when all roads lead to pain?" The dawn broke slowly, the first rays of sunlight piercing the veil of fog, casting long shadows over Alara knew her decision would echo through time, shaping the fate of a place where time itself seemed to stand still. And as the ledger's secrets settled into the light, one thing was certain: some mysteries, no matter how deeply buried, demand reckoning. The fog lingered low and heavy over Eldamore, as the village square filled with restless figures. Word had spread swiftly after Elara's bold disclosure of the ledger's darkest secrets. The centuries-old pact, once whispered about in cautious tones, now stood laid bare before all, dissolving the fragile veil of ignorance that had long cloaked the village. Voices rose in angry bursts, some demanding answers and justice, others decrying Elaros' intrusion and the shattering of their delicate peace. Margaret Langley, standing with the measured poise of a matriarch, addressed the crowd with serene authority. "This is not merely a secret," she intoned, "but the very foundation of our survival. To expose it recklessly is to invite ruin upon us all." Her words, though calm, ignited a fierce counter from those who had suffered under the weight of silence for too long. Thomas Graves stepped forward, glasses catching the dim light, his voice steady but impassioned. "We cannot live shackled to a past drenched in blood and fear. The ledger's truth is painful, yes, but it is the key to breaking this cycle." The village fractured visibly that evening, with families and friends divided by allegiance. Sophie Whitlock, caught between loyalty to her heritage and the promise of freedom, found herself torn. In the quiet back room of the inn, she confided in Alara, "I want to believe there's a future beyond this fog, beyond these lies. But I fear what we might lose." Alara nodded, understanding the heavy cost of change. Her own heart ached with the memory of her sister's unresolved fate, the relentless pursuit of justice now mirrored in Eldamore's struggle. "Truth is never without sacrifice," she whispered, "but sometimes it's the only way forward." Meanwhile, Father Benedict gathered a small group within the shadowed sanctuary of the village church. His voice, soft yet resolute, wove through the stained glass-filtered light. "Sin and secrecy have long been companions here," he said. "Perhaps now, in this fracture, lies the path to redemption or further despair. Only time will tell." As night deepened, Margaret returned to her ancestral home, the weight of her lineage pressing heavily upon her. gazing out over the village cloaked in mist. Her expression was unreadably blend of resignation and steely resolve. The fracture in Eldamore was no mere disagreement. It was a fundamental rupture that threatened to unravel centuries of careful balance. The chapter closed with the village standing on the precipice of an uncertain future, the ledger's secrets having cleaved the community into factions. Alara knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger and heartbreak. Yet, beneath the swirling fog, a faint glimmer of hope remained, a hope that even fractured loyalties might one day find common ground. But as the wind whispered through the ancient oaks, it carried with it the unspoken question: could Eldamore truly endure the storm it had unleashed? Or was this just the beginning of a deeper, darker unraveling? The answers, like the village itself, lay hidden in the mist, waiting to be uncovered.